All right, welcome back to Southeastern 14, and we are back with episode 2 of House Summit, as we are calling it here, our new Lady Vols show on Southeastern 14, our YouTube channel. And Nathanael Rutherford once again joins me for the second episode. Nathanael, we've made it to episode 2 now, and let's just be honest. Like I'd say, at least half of any podcasts or shows out there don't get to episode 2, so I feel like we've achieved something there, right?
It does. I know from plenty of podcasting ventures that really, I mean, even episode 2 is a big achievement. Really getting past like episode 5 or 6, when you get past that,
Yeah.
that's like the big, okay, we're actually consistently doing this. So don't want to pat ourselves on the back too much just yet. But,
We got a ways to go.
I thoroughly enjoyed episode 1. Seems like a lot of people liked it, and I'm very glad to be
Yeah.
back into the chair to talk about Lady Balls. So
Yep. No, we appreciate the great feedback on the first episode. We had a lot of fun talking about that one, and this is obviously a big episode, not just because it is episode 2, but because there's a bit of a big game to talk about, and we'll get to that one here in just a bit. But for starters, we got to look back at the week that was, and Nathaniel, we were talking about it before we started recording. It was kind of funny because when we talked last week, we're like, all right, they got to go to Arkansas, they got Auburn at home. One feels more dangerous than the other. And turns out you just had to flip the two. We thought the Arkansas one on the road was going to be a bit more of a challenge than the one perhaps at home against Auburn, but turned out to be a little bit different. Starting with the one in Arkansas, hey, what do you have to do if you're going to win on the road? Getting off to a great start is always a nice way to do it. And that's exactly what the Lady Vols did in this one. Got off to a good start here, was able to, hold on to that, win this game convincingly. And again, that's what you want to see, to get a 20-point win on the road at this time of year, which, by the way, I'm going to have an interesting note on Arkansas here in a second, and maybe what that did for Arkansas, actually. Yeah, it was, kind of the usual thing, I think, here in terms of how do you win? Well, again, get off to a good start. They out rebounded Arkansas by 34, which is just, I
jeez.
mean, you think about that, right? And that's something else that will come into play when we talk about the South Carolina game here in a little bit. Something we mentioned too, Nathaniel, and I have it in my notes here. We said coming in, this was an Arkansas team that was second in the league in 3-pointers made, and a team that got to the free throw line, right? And what did
Mhm.
Arkansas not do in this game? They didn't make threes. They barely got to the free throw line. And again, that was just one part of the difference here. 5 players in double figures for Tennessee, scored a lot of points, but I thought those things in particular, Arkansas could not get anything going because really their specialties, they couldn't get there in this one.
Yeah, and you jump out to a 25-9 advantage after the first
Yeah.
quarter. You got to feel pretty good about where you are. Like you said, especially on the road, where it's not been easy on any team to win on the road in the SEC this year for the women's side or men's side. It's been tough all season on both sides of it. But obviously, getting out to that huge lead in the first quarter really kind of set the tone and really sealed the deal for the rest of the match. Like you said, like Lady Vols, the rebounding was obviously the big story with Rakia and Jordy both getting 12, and both players getting double doubles in that game. That was such a really cool moment with those two being such a dynamic duo. But Lady Vols they didn't shoot that great from the free throw line. They shot 67% for the game, but they still ended up making more free throws than Arkansas even attempted, which that's
Yep.
crazy. 14 of 21 were the Lady Vols, and Arkansas was 9 of 12 as a team. So like, anytime you make more free throws than the other team attempts, that usually mean that's a pretty good recipe for success. And like you said, Arkansas always attempted a lot of threes. Both teams were kind of about the same when it came to the 3-point shooting percentage. Arkansas just shot a lot more on the year, and they still shot a ton this game. They shot 33, only made 6, whereas Lady Vol was actually one of their better shooting performances from 3, were 9 of 25 from the game. And I think that got lessened a little bit even as the game went on, because early on they were, just sniping threes left and right. Tess Darby had a good game. She's had a couple really good games here back to back for Lady Vols. But yeah, that was just it was just a game that utter dominance that I didn't expect. I thought Tennessee could win that game and would win that game. I just knew Arkansas, at least I thought Arkansas was going to be a tough out. But that first quarter and really the first half was just so controlled by the Lady Vols, and they just didn't give Arkansas a chance. And that's what that's a mark of a good team, is being able to do something like that. And yes, we'll get to the Auburn game and Lady Vols struggle on that one, but you can also look at that one being senior night. Lady Vols have a lot of seniors, and an emotional night for that. And they turned the ball over a ton in that game. But again, they survived it. And like I said, we'll get to that one more in a second. But I guess we can go ahead and transition into it if you want to, Blake. But
Yeah.
it was kind of like you said, it flipped the script, because we both thought Arkansas was going to be a lot tougher of a game. while I never really thought Tennessee was going to lose to Arkansas, to Auburn, excuse me, it was still a frustrating game to watch because it was a game where, I mean, neither team played great. Auburn had 19 turnovers themselves, and Lady Vols had 21. So like it was both teams turning the ball over a lot. But in this game, the rebounding numbers were a lot closer. And Lady Vols, again, though, didn't shoot as many threes as they did against Arkansas, but they still shot well from three, 5 of 9. And then again, free throw line 2 of 32 from the free throw line. And again, made more free throws than the other team attempted. Auburn was 14 of 19, which is still a pretty good number. But when your opponent shoots 32 free throws, I mean, good luck, because that's just, you're getting to the line so many times, time after time after time after time. There were a ton of fouls called in this game, 29 on Auburn and 20 on Tennessee. So it was an ugly game, but again, you can still put some things in perspective and say it was senior night. Lady Vols survived a gutsy effort by an Auburn team that not great, but they're better than they were last year. And Lady Vols lost to Auburn last year, and they were able to, scrap out a victory at home, in front of a pretty good crowd on senior night, which, a win's a win. This time of year, especially, you take as many wins you can get, however you get them, doesn't matter. Ugly or not, you take them.
Well, you just said what I was going to say, and that is like these are the kind of games you have to win late in the year. Like they can be a grind, they can be a struggle, but you just have to find a way to win them, and that's what happened. And you sort of, you set it aside now and learn from it and move on to the next one. And I feel like this was that kind of game because, like I said, we almost should have known, right? Because the one in Arkansas went so well that you're like, okay, there has to be one this week where you're just going to get tested a little bit. And one of the things we pointed out with Auburn coming into it, we talked about it last week. They can force turnovers. And, again, like you said, 21 turnovers for Lady Vols. But, Auburn also turned it over themselves. And that was something that certainly played into it. We talked about Aisha Coulibaly, kind of being the person that made them go. She had 15 points, but I think she only played, 26 minutes because she fouled out too. And, I think that was, something too that kind of plays into the game there a little bit. But you always hear coaches, and you brought up like 2 times in these first 2 games that we talked about, is like coaches always say, if you can, basically make more free throws than the other team attempts, you have a really good chance of winning. And like you will hear coaches at all levels say that. And like that is a big recipe for success. And I think that's something, again, too, we'll probably talk about in the South Carolina game here in a minute, and just the importance of that. Because like you said, it is a team where you only have to shoot 9 threes against Auburn and you still find a way to win. And it's because you're able to get to the free throw line and, really just kind of be in attack mode and take better shots, take easier shots. And obviously they found still quite a few of those. And by the way, just based on these 2 offensive performances, may not be all that surprising that Tennessee has actually now scored more points than any team in the SEC this season. I think they're now at 2,249 points on the season. So just for reference, LSU is, of course, at 2,217, South Carolina 2,213. So those are the top 3 scoring teams.
And part of that, too, is because Tennessee's played a couple more games than those 2 teams.
Yes,
they played 29,
right.
whereas
So
Carolina's played 27 and LSU's played 26. But, it's still impressive, though.
Helps a little bit, right? So if you're going to take it while you can get it, at least there, right? You can right now say that you're the top scoring team in the league. We're just going to leave out everything else, but you take it where you can get it when you throw out those kind of stats. So, so that is, again, something that obviously, having 2 games like that this week where you put up 80 plus points helps a little bit there. But again, two important wins, just, from the foundation of being able to use those wins and kind of catapult you forward a little bit here down the stretch, because as we said, this was a team that had basically lost 3 of 4, really need to get back on track. Now they've scored now, Nathaniel, it's 4 straight games. They've scored at least 83 or more points. Even go back to the Mississippi State game, right? They put up 90 there in the loss, but so scoring, which again, spoiler alert, you're going to need to score against South Carolina, I think, to win that game. That's a big thing. And we can now kind of transition, I think, into, we did this last week after we kind of talked about the early games, but what does this mean in terms of the NCAA tournament? Because now, you kind of look at it once again, and this week's projections you look at, and we go to ESPN for those. It's updated on Tuesday morning. We're recording this Tuesday evening. So just for, I like to go around the whole SEC here, but I'm gonna keep this sort of narrowed down to where, some of the bubble teams are at. So Arkansas is now the first team out of the field. So now remember, Arkansas, not just because they lost to Tennessee, but they also got blown out at Georgia, which did not help their case there. And we talked last week how Arkansas is one of those teams that was right there on the verge. So they're the first team out of the field. Missouri's actually the fourth team out of the field now. So that is an interesting note there to look there. Again, if you're looking at the bubble, and trust me, we're going to get to the Lady Vols in a second, but just to kind of put everything in here. Now, remember, Missouri is one of those teams, too, that you want to talk about a long losing streak, right? They had one there for a while, but they come back this week. They get wins over Mississippi State and Texas A&M. So they are now, a team that is considered the fourth team out. Mississippi State among the last four in at this point. They're the first team on that line. So a little, you're not safe on the last four in line, right, Nathaniel? But
no,
you're at least ahead of three other teams. So at least you got that going for you. Georgia is in the last four buys tier. So as we said last week, SEC very bubblicious right now when you look at some of these teams, but Georgia is certainly helping itself. It's now won 4 in a row. It's won 6 of 7, so that's helping Georgia. All right, to what you're here for, and that's the Lady Vols, who have moved up to number 6 seed at this point. Last week we talked. We said they were the number 7 seed going up against the number 2 seed Duke, which would have been in one of those. I don't remember which was one of the regions, but that was the matchup last week. This week they moved up to a 6 seed. ESPN has them paired with number 11 Columbia, which would be the automatic qualifier out of the Ivy League. That would be in South Bend against number 3 seed Notre Dame, 14 seed Drexel. So, and by the way, the one seed in that region is Greenville, and that is South Carolina. So, so there you go. That's kind of your setup. So moving up is always, again, a good thing at this time of year, and it's based on some of these recent performances. So,
yeah, like you said, a 6 seed playing, potentially Columbia, and then again, match up with Notre Dame and Drexler. I mean, that bracket though, gosh, looking at that Greenville bracket, that would be miserable because you have South Carolina, as you mentioned, as the 1 seed. Of course, this is all Charlie Cream. I don't know how accurate his projections are. I've seen a lot of Twitter conjecture that he isn't the most accurate bracketologist, but
we use ESPN because that's what everybody sees on the SEC network, right? That's what I always respond to people with. Why do we use Lenardi? Why do we use him? It's because this is what people are looking at. So we're just trying to give you the updated, what you're seeing the most, and that would be this. So.
Right, and he is the premier one in the women's side. Like you said, the men's side, you have Lenardi, you have Jerry Palm, you have other ones that kind of do things. Lenardi's still kind of the go-to, but you do have other ones you can use. There's not as many bracketologists on the women's side, unfortunately. I hope that grows as the years go on. But Charlie Cream is the premier one. But like you said, or as I was saying, Tennessee's 6 seed, but you have South Carolina as the 1 seed. Maryland as a 2 seed, who's on the Lady Vols side of the bracket. Notre Dame is a 3, and then you look at the other side, and you have UCLA as a 4. Like that is a tough top 4 seeds, and that even for South Carolina, I mean that's not an easy top 4 seeds for the number 1 overall seed in the tournament. Like usually you try to give them the easier bracket. That's not easy. I mean, to me, that's a pretty tough slate of teams there. I will be interested to see what. I guess it might depend on what the Lady Vols end up doing. Obviously, if they beat South Carolina, that's going to be a huge boon to their resume, and that might move up yet another seed line here, just instantaneously. But it'll be really interesting, even if they don't. Again, I think we talked about this last week. If they look really competitive in this game and they win the other 3 games of the last 4 they had, and finish the season with 21, or finish the regular season with 21 wins, and then you go in the SEC tournament and at least make it to, you win a game or 2 and make it to the semifinals or even the finals. And then they could maybe sneak their way up to 5. I think 6 is probably their ceiling unless they go out and win the SEC tournament. But I mean, 6 seed, depending on the bracket you're in, depending on where you get matched up with. I mean, you look at where Charlie Cream has the other Greenville region, the 6 seed over there, he has Ohio State, but the 3 seed that you would potentially face in the second round, Virginia Tech, who they've also played. You look at the other 2 regions. The 3 seed is Duke, who they fell a seed line as well, who we talked about last week. Kara Lawson being there, and then Texas, who they've also played recently. So I mean, there's a lot of teams that I don't hate the matchups for the Lady Vols as the 3 seed, but it'll be very intriguing to see how the Lady Vols are handled on Selection Sunday. Or I guess Selection, not Sunday. That's the men's side, but how they are handled by the selection committee, because they have an extremely, extremely strong strength of the schedule. I think one of, if not the top one in the or not the conference, but in the all of women's basketball. The net ranking is really good. I think they're number, last I checked, like 15 in the net, I think, which is crazy that they're still not ranked at all in the AP poll. But I saw Cora Hall, who covers Lady Vols for Knox News, tweet out about the SEC not getting enough respect in the AP poll, and I would agree with her because I do think more than South Carolina and LSU deserve to be ranked. I think Lady Vols should be, if not just 25, I think they should be ranked at this point based on what they've done recently. But no one's going to want to hear you cry about it if you have 9 losses, even if almost all those 9 losses are to pretty darn good teams.
Yeah.
And there's a good chance you'll have a 10th loss this week against South Carolina, which we'll talk about that in a second. But Blake, I think I don't care as much about the seed where the Lady Vols get seeded. I care a lot more about the matchups and what who they play in the first round. You should beat Columbia. You should beat if you're a 7 seed, you should beat the 10. You should be, if you're Lady Vols, that should be teams you don't struggle against. I would be very interested to see moving on to the second round, if you're 6 or 7, when you play the 3 or 2, how you play those games, because that's the team. Those are the teams that Lady Vols have looked competitive against this season, but haven't been able to really knock down. And that would be, that'll be so interesting to me to see what it looks like in the second round. Can they get past that and get to the Sweet 16? Because you're not going to be the higher seeded team like you were last year. You're going to be the underdog and the team that is, not expected to win. You're not going to be a 2-3 seed like you were last year. You're going to be a 6-7, maybe 5, but even there, you're still going to be matched up more evenly, I guess, with a 4 seed. So, they're firmly in. It's just a matter of how favorable of a draw can you get, and can you avoid being in? Honestly, can you avoid being in either South Carolina's or UConn's bracket? Because if you get into Indiana or Stanford, or if another 2 seed moves up to 1 line, that to me would be a win. If you can avoid at all costs, in my opinion, South Carolina, UConn, and your side of the bracket, that to me would be a pretty, I wouldn't say huge one, but it'd be nice for Lady Vols, because that way, if they do go on a run, you don't have to face one of those 2 teams that you already lost to. And I'm assuming losing South Carolina. I just am. I'm sorry, but
that's okay.
UConn, you weren't competitive. You were competitive in the second quarter, and that was it. So, I would not want to play them again.
Here's what's an interesting thought, right? So, you said that you don't want to get paired up with one of those. So, in a sense, you're almost fine being a 6 instead of a 5.
Yeah, because you stay on the bottom end of the bracket.
Right? So, that's something I would think about. And we did this last week, so let's just compare, okay? Here are the current look at the 6 seeds. Tennessee's a 6 seed. Ohio State's a 6 seed that's trending downward. South Florida's a 6 seed. Florida State's a 6 seed. Now, if you go to the 5 seed line, Iowa State is a 5 seed. Arizona is a 5 seed trending upward. And this is important to remember Arizona here for a second, because Colorado is a 5 seed trending downward. Those 2 teams play this week. So I think that's right. Or maybe they just played. Maybe I'm thinking of Colorado. Let me pull up the schedule again real quick.
Yeah.
So they just played. Okay. Arizona beat Colorado 61-42. What I was thinking of is Colorado plays Stanford this week. So if you want to throw that out as probably a loss potentially for Colorado as well, again, that hands them another loss. They're a 5 seed trending downward, so maybe they drop down a bit. So that is something I think you have to keep in mind too. The other 5 seed is North Carolina. So, but I do think there is something to what you just said, because especially, and I think we could probably say this every season in women's basketball at times, because there is, like, recently there have just been some of those teams like you just want absolutely no part of, right? Like if we talk about it, if we're talking about, let's say if we use this season for the NCAA men's tournament, there are some of those teams that you're just like, you really like to stay away from, but like it's not to that level to where you're just like, there's no way to get past them. Like you feel like that's kind of the case with a couple of these women's teams, because they are, again, have looked so dominant at times where it's just stay as far away, get as far into the tournament as you can before you have to play them. And I think that's kind of where you're at. So I think the seeding is very important, and it may be for a different reason than you think. It's almost like it's not important to necessarily have to move up. It's just important to stay away from the teams that, again, you probably, and I know the counter argument is this, right? It's, well, you have to play them at some point. Well, that's true, but why wouldn't you want to wait as far as you can, get a little further before you have to get there? So almost in Tennessee's instance, like you said, if they lose to South Carolina, is that going to ding them? Now, if they lose by 40 or something, now sure, right? Like that can change things a little bit. But a loss to South Carolina does not hurt your NCAA tournament resume, because 27 other teams have that too on their resume right now. So, or whoever, not every team will make the tournament, but you know what I'm saying. So that's something to keep in mind. So I think that's that's worth considering. Now, that's where, look, if you lose to South Carolina and then you go lose to Kentucky, well, then things get a little bit, dicier because you're probably moving down a seed line. And that's where I think for Tennessee, I'm going to be honest, like, I think the 6 almost feels a night, like we talked about them being a 7 last week or being a 5. I feel like the 6 is kind of just the sweet middle spot to where you look at the 3 seed line. Maybe that's another thing to talk about right now. The 3 seed line, as we said, Notre Dame is one of the 3 seeds. Virginia Tech's a 3 seed. Duke's a 3 seed. We talked about that last week. And Texas is a 3 seed moving up. So by no means are those teams that you're just, lining up and excited to play. But it's different than it would be, again, if you're a 5 seed, you win your first 2 games, and then you get South Carolina or UConn. It's just like, that's something you got to think about. So.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like you said, you gotta, if you keep winning, you gotta play them eventually. But like you said, you'd rather play them in the Elite Eight or the Final Four or the title game rather than having to play them in the second round or in the Sweet 16. Like you don't want to, you want to keep putting off. When you
I'm not
play them.
suggesting Tennessee lose, Nathaniel. I want to make that very clear. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm just pointing out if you're looking at matchups. That's all I'm saying.
No, yeah, heck, I really hope Lady Vols beat South Carolina. I mean, that'd be incredible.
Yes.
Because then, I mean, who knows?
They're moving up if that happens.
Right. So, that could be. I mean, these last few games could be something that sparks Lady Vols. Like you said, they've been playing better, especially on offense lately. 4 straight games of 80+ points, and you had to go back to when they scored 80 or I guess 90 against Mississippi State, but that was obviously an overtime game. But still, like you had to go back all the way. I think it was the Vanderbilt game on January 8th. Before that, when the last time the Lady Vols had scored 80 in a game, they had been scoring in like the 60s and one game in the 70s up until that game against Mississippi State. So it had been basically a whole month since you had scored 80 points, and now you've done it in 4 straight contests. Granted, like Mississippi State's a good team, but you've done it against Vanderbilt and you did it against Auburn as well, which aren't great teams. But you also did it on the road against Arkansas, who is a pretty solid team, who's a borderline NCAA tournament team. Now, are you going to be able to do it against South Carolina? Answer is probably no, because I don't think a single team. Yeah, no team has scored 80 points on South Carolina this season. I think the best has been Stanford dropped 71, and then UConn dropped 77. So you've had 2 teams get into the 70s. Those are the only 2 teams that they've even gotten into the 70s, Blake, against. I mean, they're just so dominant on both ends of the court. I will say, though, I guess we can move on and talk.
I know where you're going.
It took overtime to beat Ole Miss, which was a stunning performance, because I mean, Ole Miss is a good team. Don't get me wrong; they're scrappy, and it was on the road. But I mean, that was surprising when I was. Remember where we're driving back from Middle Tennessee back to Knoxville on Sunday, and I happened to get the notification that the game was going to overtime as I parked, and I was like, "Wait, what?" I was like, "Is this the women's side?" I was like, "This isn't men's. Why did I get a notification about that?" I was like, "Ole Miss is taking South Carolina to overtime," so that was crazy to see. And then I don't know, they've not played. I guess they played okay against Florida, and they played really really well against LSU. I mean, they trounced them. But I just you never know. Anything can happen, but it does feel like this South Carolina team is still pretty dominant. I mean, they're 27-0. They're likely going to finish 29-0. They've had, that was a scare that UConn, gave them a really good game. And earlier in the year, Stanford gave them a good game. But I mean, other than that, Blake, I mean, UCLA, I guess they fought and played pretty well against them too. But I've not watched a ton of South Carolina, so I am just kind of looking at some of the box scores. Mississippi State, that was a close one too on the road. Man, most of the games have not been close though, and but the ones they've struggled, the ones that have been the hardest, have been the road games. You look at UConn, at Ole Miss. I just mentioned at Mississippi State. Those are the games that were some of the closest ones they've had, and those were all on the road. I think the Stanford game was on the road, or that or is neutral, one of the two. But again, that one was close, and it wasn't in South Carolina. So the chance there for Lady Vols, and we'll start breaking it down here, is that it is in Knoxville. And it's going to be, that's going to be it says at Tennessee. Is that right? I thought it was, So never mind. I was wondering, because it was senior night. I guess they're honoring the seniors and stuff, even though it's not technically the last home game for Auburn, or this last weekend against Auburn. But it's, ESPN. It's going to be a huge game. Even though Lady Vols aren't ranked, it's still going to be Lady Vols, big brand, versus the number 1 team in the country. Like we've seen the men's team do it. They beat the number 1 team in Thompson Bowling. Maybe Lady Vols can do the same thing.
Well, I mean, this is so fascinating, and you brought up some of the reasons that I was going to mention. You brought it. The first thing I have on my list here is the road aspect, because I mean, let's face it, it's still college basketball. Home court still matters for a lot of teams, and it is different when you go on the road. Now, let me just read you some of the results from South Carolina on the road. I'm not saying that they're not, they're 27-0 for a reason, but I'm putting out just the hard data here. Okay, we talked about the Ole Miss game, 64-57 on the road there. At Auburn, 83-48. That's obviously good. At UConn, winning that game period, 81-77 is a good win. At Alabama, 65-52. So, scoring wise, not right there. Okay. Vanderbilt, we talked about their issues. No surprise, they put up 96 against Vanderbilt, even though it's on the road. Kentucky, as we said, another team that's right there near the bottom with Vanderbilt. At Georgia, 68-51. So you're seeing a couple things here, right? Against some of the better teams, I guess you could say, scoring has been, I'm not going to call it an issue because they're still winning these games by double digits, most of these. So it's like, but it is something that you look at, right? Maybe they just don't shoot it as well on the road at times. And that is something that I think if you're Tennessee, you're going to try to lean on that, because if you look at the Ole Miss game, which again, that one's going to be looked at quite a bit. And I think if you're a Tennessee fan, it's almost like it's a double-edged sword. You want to see that they're, not unbreakable, but you also didn't maybe want to see that the game right before they played you, because that's a great way for Don Staley to get their attention. And so, you look at that game, right? South Carolina shoots 37.7% from the floor. They go 3 of 11 from 3. They miss some free throws, 15-22. Turn the ball over a bit, turned over 15 times. And remember, this is a team that does not turn the ball over very much, and they turned it over 15 times. So I think that's something too to kind of keep in mind. And I think that's part of this here to me, is like, if you're looking for the path, you obviously have to force them to take tough shots. If you're looking at it just from steals per game, okay, I looked these stats up. Tennessee and South Carolina average the exact same steals per game. They're both averaging 7.2 steals per game. So it's like, if you're Tennessee, you'd love to be one of those teams like almost like an Auburn, right? That forces a lot of turnovers consistently. And if they can find a way to do a little bit more of that in this game, that can play a big factor, I think. Rebounding is another one. We talked about Tennessee kind of going on a tear here, rebounding wise. And what was it? They out rebounded Arkansas by 34. We talked about the Vanderbilt game, out rebounded them by 26. Clearly, rebounding is a priority in this game, because when you look at what these two teams are capable of, these are both very good rebounding teams. And I think what I find here as one of the things that could really stand out, by the way, just for the stats, South Carolina's averaging 50.3 rebounds per game. Tennessee's averaging 43.6. Now, keep in mind, South Carolina's causing teams to miss a lot of shots too, and that adds a few more rebounds, doesn't it? So that's something. Offensive rebounds. Here's one stat I think that could really play a big factor here, right? So South Carolina, of course, leads the league in offensive rebounds, 494 offensive rebounds this season, 18.3 offensive rebounds per game. That is, again, to me, if you're circling stuff, that is an area where somehow, if you're Tennessee, they're going to get their offensive rebounds, but getting 18 is probably not a recipe for success. You've got to find a way to limit those second chance opportunities. And something else, and I know I'm kind of rambling here, but I'm throwing out all the stats I have on my list, because I'm going to let you go with it wherever you want to go with it. But obviously, we just talked about it. South Carolina's ability to impact shots on the defensive side, that average 9.3 blocks per game. Like, that's something else where you're not going to get a ton of easy looks, and that they are going to block some shots and make things a little harder on that side of the floor. So all that to say, do I think Tennessee has a chance here? I do, because of some of the things, like we said. It's a road game for South Carolina. They didn't play great at Ole Miss. Now, do you expect them, a team that's pretty much been dominant, to have back-to-back games like that?
No.
Probably not. But they're playing a team in Tennessee that is hot right now. I think we have to keep that in mind too. Like, they're playing good basketball. They're putting up points. And so I know a lot of people are not going to give Tennessee a chance here, but I do find the matchup itself fascinating, because you still have Rickea Jackson, right? Who is someone that can, a lot of those areas we talk about, one's the circle or potential question marks. she can help out there, like, and she can make a big difference. So maybe I'm just like, I'm leaning too much into the, you just said it, right? Like Tennessee just beat, the number one team on the men's side. Maybe there's some mojo left there, and maybe this thing happens. I think if South Carolina had beat Ole Miss by 20 something, maybe I'm not going that far into it, but we did see that this team can have those games along the line, and this is a Tennessee team that's playing pretty well right now. So.
Yeah, I think this game, you've obviously missed Tamari Key in a lot of games this year with her being out with, her unfortunate health issues with the blood clotting. I think this is the game where you're going to miss her the most because, as you mentioned, because of the rebounding, because of the block shots, she would be able to help you, in theory at least, even out those numbers a little bit more, especially on the block shot side. Lady Vols haven't been out nearly as prolific this year blocking shots because they've not had Tamari Key, but they've still been exceptional at rebounding because you still have good post players and you still have someone like Jordan Horston who is just so good at rebounding. And Ricky Jackson, again, she's been really good at, crashing the glass too, because your Tennessee's guards are actually just very good at rebounding. And that's the mark of a really good rebounding team when your guard play is able to go out and get rebounds. I don't think it's a coincidence that I think the women's game is still very predicated on rebounding and especially offensive rebounds and getting second chance points. That's why I don't think it's a coincidence that the top three teams in the SEC this season are the top three teams when it comes to offensive rebounds per game. But South Carolina being number one, LSU being number two, and Tennessee being number three in that category of offensive rebounds per game. And then Ole Miss number four. And then they're, I think tied with Bama in that fourth spot right now for the SEC. So it's not a coincidence that the three best teams in the SEC with the best record are the three best rebounding teams, and specifically three best when it comes to offensive boards and getting second chance points and likely getting those offensive boards going over second chance shot. And if you don't make the shot, even getting fouled and going to the free throw line. So I think that in this game is going to be massively important. You talk about things you circle. I mean, to me, it's the rebounding and the second chance opportunities that has to be circled multiple times in this game. I think that's where this game is won and lost. And unfortunately for Tennessee, I mean, South Carolina is just elite there. I mean, as good as Lady Vols have been, South Carolina is still just, significantly better. Lady Vols are really, really good at rebounding with, as you mentioned, 43.6 per game, and that's third in the SEC. But then South Carolina's number one with almost 7 more rebounds per game. And that's just crazy. That 50.3, they're averaging 50 rebounds per game. They were averaging almost the exact same amount of defensive rebounds as Vanderbilt has overall rebounds this season. That's just how good they are. They're averaging 32 defensive rebounds per game, and Vandy this season has averaged 32.1. Like, that is how good they've been at rebounding. Is that just defensive rebounds? They have basically as many as Vandy has as an entire team on both ends of the court. So that's what we're talking about when it comes to rebounding. It's not just Alea Boston. I mean, she's really darn good. She's averaging almost a double-double. I mean, basically, if you round up, really, she's averaging 9.9 boards. So basically,
we'll give it to her.
10 rebounds a game. So she's averaging basically double-double on the year. But it's not just her. As I just mentioned with Lady Vols, like South Carolina's guards are also very good at rebounding. They're just a very, very good. You don't get 50 rebounds per game with one player being good. Like, your entire team is really good at rebounding. So I think that getting to the free throw line and rebounding, what you've done the last few games where you've dominated those stats, you're not going to dominate in this one, but you have to be just as good. Like, you have to be having that same mentality of attack. And as much as I want the Lady Vols to have more shooters and be able to shoot the three better, because I think the women's game is transitioning a little bit more into that. I think they're just behind the men's game in that regard because of the growth of the game. And that can be a whole different side topic for another podcast. But my point is that as much as I want Lady Vols to shoot the three more, and they have done a better job last few games, this is a game where you can shoot the three. And I think if you have success, that's going to be, I think, an X factor, but you are going to have to win this game in the paint. And, it's going to be tough to do that, I think, for the Lady Vols. But again, you have the slashers, you have, players like Rakia and Jordan Horston who can make that difference in the paint that, aren't traditional post players, but have the athleticism and have the tools to score in so many variety of ways that, like you said, I don't think a lot of people are going to give the Lady Vols a chance. I don't know if a betting line has been open for it yet. I don't think they usually do until the day of on basketball.
Day before,
but I imagine South Carolina is going to be a pretty big favorite.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because I do think, and look, as we said, like betting, especially like at all the places with the betting statistics and the trends. I'm curious, a team like this, like South Carolina, after a close call, right? Like I think that's an interesting trend. And again, you think about all the bazillion stats that these betting, people who set the odds, they have all this. Like they have the 50 times in the past where, the number one team has struggled the game before and what happens the next game and how do we set the line there. And so I think that's something too. And if we use the, I guess the reference of, and it's funny because like South Carolina, when you say South Carolina struggled in games, you have to like put it in quotations because like,
Right.
in comparison to everyone else,
But it's like
still,
the Georgia football this last year. They struggled in some games
right.
and still, I mean, Missouri's the only, I guess, the outlier, but they still won every single game. So
yeah, right. So it's like, if we look at some of those, okay, let's go back to Georgia. They struggled by winning by 17 on the road, but they only scored 68 points. Okay, we're just gonna use. We don't have much to go on, so we have to use this. They turn around the next game and beat Auburn by 52. Okay, at Mississippi State, 58-51, hard fought game there on January 8th. They turn around and play Kentucky. They beat Kentucky by 29. Now again, opponent matters too, right? So let's not forget that. Alabama, 65-52. They won by 13 on the road there. Turn around and beat Kentucky by 18. The UConn game.
Poor Kentucky just had the misfortune of playing South Carolina after they had struggled on the road and then just got walloped both
Kentucky
times.
just in the bad spot for these. UConn, again, I don't know how you could say they struggled. They won 81-77. They won by 4. But if you just want to go by scoring margin, they came out and beat Auburn by 35 the next game. And also, let's not forget this too, okay? They did beat LSU by 24. And I think that's something you have to remember. Like LSU is a very good team. And, that was in Columbia though. Let's point that out. But it is something like when this team's at its best, there's a reason it's 27-0. It's because it can do what you saw in the game against LSU. It can find a way to win a game like they did against UConn. Yes, they may have the Ole Miss games here and there, but those are just rare. And I think that's why, again, if you're trying to align everything for a Tennessee victory, like this is way more about Tennessee than South Carolina, because like Tennessee has to play the perfect game, right? Like that's kind of what it comes down to. So
and my hope too is, for the Lady Vols to get a win is there's been times this year, and again, a lot of times it's been on the road where South Carolina has gotten off to slower starts. You look at the UConn game. I said going into that in the first quarter when I was watching the game and looked on Twitter and saw a bunch of people exclaiming over it, I said, UConn tends to start fast, and South Carolina lately has been starting slow. This is going to even out. And what did it do? It evened out pretty quickly in the second quarter. And then South Carolina never could pull away in that one, but they still felt relatively in control for a decent amount of that second half. But that is, again, if the Lady Vols can replicate more or less what they did in the Arkansas game, if they can come out and start fast and start strong, and South Carolina has a slow start, again, that to me would be a huge difference maker. You cannot in this game, you cannot start the same way you did against UConn. You just can't. You can't do that same thing like you did at home and start slow and let, and part of that was because UConn shot the ball really well, but the defense didn't do the team any favors in that game in that first quarter, especially, and was letting UConn get a bunch of backdoor cuts and was just not doing great defensively. Lady Vols are going to have to bring it defensively in this game. Like this is going to have to be a mindset of, we're going to play this game not dirty, but it's going to be a scrappy game against the best team in the country. We're going to have to give this our best shot to win this game. And I guess the hope they have is if South Carolina gets off to a slow start, you get off to a fast one, and maybe you're able to get a couple of like Cook or Boston into foul trouble. Like if you can get something like that, if you can, again, control the foul situation, get to the free throw line pretty often, you got to like your chances better than if you can't do those two things. Because that's how Lady Vols have won a lot of their games this year, has been able to, get to the free throw line more, get a bunch of second chance opportunities, and really, again, not turn the ball over a ton. That's going to be a big thing. Because
where I was going to go.
South Carolina doesn't turn the ball over. Lady Vols they can't give South Carolina, you can't give them multiple possessions. You can't give them 15 extra possessions. Like you just can't and beat them. At least you can, and you'll lose by 20 or 30 points. But if you want to win, you can't give them 15, 20 extra possessions in a game. You just cannot do that because they're already going to get multiple extra possessions on their offensive rebounding. So like you can't just gift them a bunch of turnovers. And turnovers are going to happen. You can't play a perfect game, but you got to be smart with the ball. And that's where, I hope Tennessee's point guards in this game, and that's not just the point guards. There's been bad passing from, multiple players this year, but really it's obviously starts with the point guards. You're going to have Jordan and Jazz. They're going to have to come with it, and they're going to have to play within themselves and not try to do too much. And not try to play too fast, because that's where they get in all the troubles. If they try to play too fast and try to do too much with the passing, and it leads to turnovers. They can't do that in this game and win. So, Blake, you can add some more. I feel like I just want this game to happen at this point. If we're recording this on Tuesday, I am really excited for Thursday. Again, unfortunately I'm not expecting the Lady Vols to win, but I would love to be back in this chair on Tuesday and say I was wrong and say that. Yeah. Lady Vols, upset the number one team in the country, but I don't think it'll happen. I would love to be wrong though. Like I've never wanted to be more wrong about something.
Well, I'm saying if it does happen, you and I may be doing an emergency show on,
I'd be fine with
on
that,
Friday or something. I think that's probably going to happen. I am optimistic here, and again, I may be proven wrong, but I am optimistic because I think we've seen what Tennessee, and we just talked about how good LSU is, right? And, you think about that game in particular, and I think but I think you have to keep in the context of what we just said. Think about all the things we just listed that have to go right for Tennessee here. And that's because of how good South Carolina is. And I think as long as you keep that in perspective, a lot has to go right here. But if you're looking for a team that is playing really well right now, and maybe, it does have a lot going right for it. And Tennessee, to me, is that team. There's a lot that's going. They're doing a lot of good things right now. And you almost wonder if the Auburn game is part of that too, right? Like you said, senior night. You're just getting to this game, like for both teams. Like it was just, let's just get there. And I'm optimistic. I think Tennessee has a chance here, and
they have a chance, yeah. Because you said they've been playing better, and it's not like they've been blown out in every big game they've played. Like they've played, obviously, South Carolina is still just a different monster than even UConn and LSU. Like you've played some really good teams, and for the most part, you've not been manhandled in them. And if you were, it was the early season when this team was not gelling early in the year. They just weren't, and they've gotten better, have a lot better chemistry now than they did back then. So they absolutely have a chance. And man, it would be fun to have to do an emergency broadcast because they beat the number one team. That'd be so much fun.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. They have a chance, but like we said, this too is South Carolina, and this is a team that they are where they are for a reason. They didn't luck into getting here, and so you never are going to discount any game possibility here in terms of the outcome. Like I think anything's possible, and that goes for both sides. Because again, you just know how South Carolina, how good they've been, and if they're at their best, Tennessee or no one else is beating them. It doesn't matter. Tennessee, anyone else, other name on the jersey, they're the best team again if they're at their best. So, but yeah, this will be a lot of fun. Hopefully for Tennessee fans, this will be a lot of fun because maybe it won't be because wouldn't be the first time that's happened for South Carolina opponents this season. But but it should be very interesting. And I guess quickly, Nathaniel, we can wrap up. I don't really think we have a lot to say about the Kentucky game because I think it's really all dependent on.
Yeah, I guess we didn't talk about that at all, did we?
But I mean, let's just be honest, right? Like it's whatever happens here, that's going to probably be the bigger talking point. As we said, Kentucky is obviously a team that has struggled. They're 10-16, 2-12 in the SEC. They've lost 5 in a row. Have been competitive in some of these games, of course. And let's be honest, Kentucky too has lost some close games this season. You think about things go their way a little bit differently. I look back at it. They lost to Missouri by 3, Georgia by 4. Of course, my dog Barry's excited about this. Mississippi State by 1, Auburn by 3. So I keep that in mind too with Kentucky, but I'll let Nathaniel talk real quick so that way I can mute Barry over here. So
yeah, well, I can help wrap up too because I wanted to say that appreciate everyone, like you said, who gave feedback on the first episode and gave the video a like, everything like that. If you're new to the channel because you're a Lady Vol fan and want to see more, we do this every Tuesday. Again, I do emergency broadcasts if we need to, but we'll keep doing it here as we get into postseason. But definitely subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and give this video a like for sure. And to mention about Kentucky, like you said, I mean they've had some close ones, but lost 5 straight, and even before that this year, you beat Missouri and you beat Florida, but then you also had another 5-game losing streak before beating Florida. Like they just have they've struggled a ton this year, and I know their team, the roster was very different from what it was last year. I won't say very, but it was significantly different. You lost your best player, into the WNBA draft from last year. But like the drop off from last season to this season for Kentucky has been, to me, at least a little surprising. Like I didn't expect this much of a drop off for them this year. But it is going to be at home for Kentucky, where they have played better than on the road. Most teams play better at home than on the road, but they lost to Georgia by 10 last home game. They lost to Alabama by 7, but they also beat Missouri and lost close one to Auburn, and then also got trounced by South Carolina. So again, there's not a good team, but I mean they do tend to play better at home than on the road. That's true for most teams. So Blake, unless you have something else to add, I mean, like you said, the big topic next week's going to be the South Carolina game, and then looking at the SEC tournament and seeing the pathway and everything there. Because right now, I mean, Lady Vols are locked in to me to the 3rd seed. I don't think unless LSU loses out, I don't think Lady Vols can move up. So and they can't move down. So they're locked in the 3rd, in my opinion, because I don't think LSU is going to lose out. So you're pretty much locked in. It's just a matter of what are the other seeding? But there's a huge traffic jam in the middle there with Alabama, Ole Miss 9-5, Mississippi State, Georgia 8-6, then Arkansas, Missouri at 6-8. So like there's a big logjam there of teams that can move up and move down the seeding, and that can affect who the Lady Vols will play in their first game. So we'll talk about that next week, but that's kind of the look ahead.
Yep, for sure. We will talk all about it. As Nathaniel said, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Yes, you will get you will get Barry the Wonder Dog over here. We'll be interrupting shows as we go along, I guarantee you. So that comes for free. You don't have to pay for that. So like that's free of charge here on the Southeastern 14 YouTube channel. So yeah, hit that subscribe button again. If you're just finding this for the first time, you're a Lady Vols fan. I assume you're probably a Tennessee fan of some sort as well. So we do a lot of other sports, of course. We cover SEC football, men's basketball, and baseball. So much content going up every day. So hit that subscribe button. A lot more videos for you there. And again, we appreciate all the great support, great feedback on the first episode. Hope you enjoy this one. And yes, we will be back next week here talking more Lady Vols here on the Southeastern 14 YouTube channel.